Well, welcome everybody to a second last or third last event. Actually, we've got a lot crammed in over the next 4 or 5 weeks, actually. But our third last evening event of the year. And I'm really delighted to welcome our guests, Deb and Kate. I'll get to introducing them just properly in a moment. But before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting tonight. We are really lucky to live on this land and to acknowledge those elders past, present and emerging. And I'd further like to extend that acknowledgement to any First Nations people joining us tonight or at home. We are on Yuggera country and the traditional custodians are the Yuggera and the Turrbal people. So without further ado, Kate and Deb. Kate, some of you may be familiar with her work as the presentation boss. If not, please look up the podcast. It's a great podcast. I love your podcast. It's awesome. And Kate is a gun at taking really complex ideas and data and all those sorts of things and turning them into really compelling stories, particularly with visuals through presentation. And I think that comes from your dark past as an analyst. Is that correct?
It is.
Yes. It's okay, guys. She broke through. She came out the other side a better person. Just don't mention analyst report because PTSD. So we're really lucky to have Kate here tonight. She's been doing a lot of traveling running a lot of training all over the country. And when we had to reschedule from the Queen's Day of Mourning, which is when this was originally scheduled, it was difficult to find a time because she is in such high demand. So thank you so much, Kate, for joining us tonight. Deb has been a long-standing member of IABC. So thank you for supporting IABC for such a long time. It's been beautiful to have you on board. Deb is the brains behind the Communication Dividend. So taking communications and measuring them, but doing it in a really good way. And she's going to tell you much more about that throughout the course of this evening. If you've got any questions at home, please jump onto Zoom in the chat. We'll take questions from the room as well throughout, and we'll get through as many as we can as we go. Okay, so I'm going to stop that share there. Beautiful. Hello, Kathy. Can see your beautiful smiling face. Everybody can see it on the screen too. So first question really is, let's talk about the now and the future of data and analytics. Like data and analytics, we hear those words and we think, well, as comms people, we probably think, oh my God, that's not my thing. But it absolutely has to be our thing, right? So why is it so important to communications professionals?
Let you take that one.
Sure. I think, we all know why we get into communications, because I think, generally love words more than numbers. So who's comfortable? Who loves words here and online? Who loves numbers? It's not quite so many. And who loves both? Yeah, I mean, we all know why we got into comms, is because we, either love a deadline, love words, love deliverables. And so it's not surprising that trying to be literate and numerate is a challenge for a lot of us. And I think we all know the theory. We all know that we should be able to prove the effectiveness of the work that we're doing. I call it the so what and what next. And but there's never been a better time than there is now with all of the digital tools that are available in the online world. There's still a big world that's offline. That's where we could actually harness the power of that information in the way that Kate's going to share with you too, to be able to search for insight. And I think it's absolutely critical that we can prove our value. There is no point spending $1 on communication if you can't prove its value.
Mm-hmm. Write that down. Kate, what are your thoughts?
So I guess I come at it from almost the opposite angle of I'm a numbers person, and I work with numbers people who believe that numbers just speak for themselves, and they absolutely do not. I work with analysts who will put up a very complex chart, and I will say to them, what does this mean? And they're like flabbergasted that I don't like that. It's not just so obvious to me, and it's not just so obvious to everyone else. So yeah, I guess I come from the other angle of, you need that data there to prove, everyone wants data these days to back up the words. Nothing can go unproven, as you're saying. But, data by itself is not enough either. You need that communication piece to go with it and to simplify that data so it is able to be understood by as many people as possible, because we're not all numbers people.
I'm certainly not. I pay somebody to do that for me. Throw money at the problem, I say. What, on that note, what are some of the basics that comms professionals need to know to confidently use that data to start to shape what they do, their strategy, proving their value?
Yeah.
I was going to say,
go.
it might be helpful if I
Yeah.
do that sort of bigger picture and then.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess, can I just sort of share a little bit of my
Absolutely.
measurement journey, and that will help guide you to, you know, what I'm going to be sharing in terms of what best practice looks like. Because, you know, I started my PhD in collaborative governance, actually, in the coal seam gas sector, and I absolutely hated it. I did 12 months and I was so terrible at it. And I thought, you know, I'm going to solve an applied business problem. And for me, having been you know, what I describe as a career communicator, and I always say my hair is an indication of how long I've been doing this. You know, I was at QUT before there were any graduates. So I was in the second intake of graduates, students at QUT. And I guess I had always felt that, you know, we should be able to prove our value like any other profession. And then I did my MBA at UQ and I was surrounded by engineers. And I thought, if engineers can factor in for risk, you know, building a bridge and roads and things like that, why on earth can we not have similar discipline in, you know, being able to articulate at least our value? So I ditched my PhD. I went on this voyage of discovery and looked at everything that was going on around the world and realized the reason we don't do it is because it's so bloody hard. It just did not make sense to me at all. There are like as many frameworks as you could poke a stick at. So through that sort of voyage of discovery, I then got exposure to, there's an organization called AMEC, AMEC, not like in the Roadrunner, but it's the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. So it's an organization that would be very useful for you to be aware of. And I came across AMEC and it was just like all the lights came on for me. It was just finally I found the organization that helped me to actually articulate what I had been feeling very uncomfortable about for a long time, which was about being able to have the vocabulary, to have the frameworks around actually being able to demonstrate value. I mean, we all write comms strategies, and the measurement and evaluation or, you know, monitoring chapter is the last chapter that goes in there. You think about, oh God, how am I going to be able to prove that this has worked? You put down a few things, bit of monitoring, bit of tracking, bit of this, bit of that, and hope like heck the client doesn't actually, you know, call you on it, you know, in many respects. But that's in its worst case. But there are many, you know, revelations that I think that I'd be very happy to share with you tonight. I don't want to take up too much time, but I do have some frameworks that I think will really open your eyes to the possibilities and simplify that very big, complex world of measurement and evaluation of comms that's out there.
Thank you, Deb. Kate, what do you think are some of those?
I'm going to need the
fundamental
question again.
truths?
I'm sorry.
I know, I got caught up in the story.
That was
too.
a too long an answer.
Tell me more, Deb. What are some of the basics that you think comms professionals need to know to confidently use data to shape their strategies?
For me, I think it's almost a permission to simplify and a permission to use really quite basic graphs. And this is what I get from people is that freedom of like, I thought that I had to use something that was more impressive. I thought that I had to have something that looked fancy, that made me look smart, but that's not what it's about. It's about how can we actually bring something back to its simplest core messaging. And I'm sure everyone, you know, has that basic understanding of audience and message is everything. And your data just needs to speak to that and nothing more.
Not overcook it.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all seen that with clients too. I've had PowerPoint packs that are 56 pages long that could have just been 5. And yeah, I think people get, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but my own experience is people get caught up in their own knowledge base.
Yeah.
And try to create all these slides and graphs and things that kind of, you know, show everything they know, but nobody else needs to know everything you know.
That's it.
Yeah.
And coming from an analytics background as well, you do so much stuff. You're constantly playing in data and mucking around in Excel or whatever you use. And it's really frustrating because what you actually end up sharing and presenting is, I'm totally guessing here, but about 2 to 3% of your work. It's just that final piece. You've been playing in the data and you've been looking at this stuff, and you kind of want to show people, the whole journey. And we call it the analyst's journey, but you don't need the whole, how you did it. This is why we have analytics teams, is to do that stuff kind of behind the scenes and just present, what have you found? What does this actually mean for the organization? And exactly what you said, Deb, about so what and what next?
Just on that, Mel, if I can share, because we were talking beforehand, and I think Kate and I have got two examples from totally different perspectives as to the power of a graphic to when it comes to communication. And the example that I use is one that I read about a journalist for the New York Times called Nicholas Kristof, Kristof, writing in the New York Times in 2008, who presented a table that was headlined "Death by Water." And it was the number of people who were dying from dysentery around the world. And it totally changed the course of the Gates Foundation's funding for, towards dysentery. And they said no graphic in the sort of course of humankind has been more important than that. Now, one table was able to capture attention on a page where I'm sure we craft words so carefully and lovingly and keep writing and writing and writing to the, the space available. And yet that whole principle of less is more that, Kate uses is absolutely a very powerful, reminder to us of the value of a graphic or a chart to bring about change.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, because inspired by your story, Deb, and how you got to where you are, Kate, how do you go from being an analyst to a comms person? I feel like that's a big leap.
Yes and no. So I was a data analyst. I worked in finance for a little while, but I spent a lot of time in workplace health and safety for Energex. It's now Energy Queensland. And safety in energy is fairly important because electricity. And so I would spend every month putting this report together, and I'd go and present it to the executive team. And I would walk out feeling amazing, because I'd walk out and they'd say, "Thanks, that was really interesting." I'm like, "Yes, I am interesting." And then I come back the next month and present my next month's worth of results and say, how did we go from the recommendations from last month? Nothing. Just nothing had been done. And I soon worked out that "thanks, that was interesting" is not actually a compliment. And I had a really fantastic manager at the time who walked me through and said, you need to get out of your numbers. You're all about numbers, and there's more to life than numbers. And really helped me. She was a comms professional. Data analytics wasn't as big of a thing, and they just kind of shoved me under the comms woman at the time. And she was just really good with making me understand the value and the importance of being able to communicate really important numbers, so that you'd get more than "thanks, that was interesting."
Yeah. And it's funny, isn't it, how sometimes when you are shoved in these roles, you learn so much more from the people around you than you think, right? Comms people often get shoved into HR or marketing or finance or somewhere, and doesn't seem like a right fit, but you still learn heaps out of those roles. Absolutely. So on that, what are some of the most common mistakes you've both seen communications professionals make when it comes to working with numbers and working with data?
Oh, I think, to Kate's point, just any number, big numbers and lots of them, as an indication of value. And I think it used to be like the old PR strategies, you sort of charged by the weight rather than, getting back to a plan on a page approach. I think having the maturity to be able to know what numbers you're looking for. If you see so many reports, we had 5 million impressions, which means absolutely nothing. I think we've been very poor at educating clients to want better information. I think we've been really sort of skimming along the surface and hoping like heck no one was going to ask the hard questions. And so those big numbers, and lots of big numbers and lots of impressions and lots of opportunities to see, and which essentially meaningless, is what we have hung our hats on. And also, I'm going to say it here now, those who are still using AVEs, the advertising value equivalents, which are provided by the media intelligence agencies, and clients who still love seeing all those big numbers and big dollars of the advertising equivalency, that is just no deal. Should not be done. Worst practice ever.
It sounds like it's more about measuring outcomes and output. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think. Sorry. So yes, we have been. I think because the tools exist, we've been focusing on outputs.
Yeah. We've
got to evolve to be focusing on outcomes.
Yeah. Kate,
outcomes and outputs. I like that. I need like notes.
it's being recorded.
Oh, good. For me, it's definitely, and I'm going to say this 100 times, complexity. Too much complexity is just never going to win.
What's the right balance then between oversimplifying and being too complex? How do you find that balance? Because I think there's a feeling that simple means dumbing it down, which isn't the case.
No.
Simplifying means making it easy to understand. But at what point are you going maybe perhaps too far down the simplification route?
I don't know if you can, because you've still got to have value, right? Like, just because it's like, if you've got a very simple message and it's not valuable, then it's useless. So I don't know if you can be too simple. I think you've got to certainly start higher level and provide detail when asked for, and not provide detail as default.
Oh, I like that. Write that down. So we often do a lot of work in comms that doesn't, and to your point just before, Deb, doesn't often have a very tangible output. We can't measure this investment made this much money, or that intranet article led to behavior change, for example. So how do you measure those outcomes when it does feel a little bit intangible? It feels hard to measure.
Well, I guess, that's where qualitative approaches are helpful. It's not always about the big numbers. Again, in communication, as you know, it's the small numbers, minorities and small groups that can have a big impact. And I guess similarly, qualitative research, qualitative data can help build out a story. And so I think, again, it's about managing expectations of the audience that's going to receive that information. The fact that it's intangible, reputation is intangible, and we all rely on it as an outcome and impact measure potentially. And we find ways to make the intangible tangible. So I guess for me, and I'll sort of share a little bit later on, I always come back to the communication life cycle, and about the behavior you want to change. And if you're working in something that's intangible, I think you have to try to find the behavior that you're trying to change, no matter how intangible that might be.
What do you think, Kate? How do you measure something that feels intangible?
I don't know. That's completely Deb's area.
Beautiful. Well, Deb, now you have provided some information for us to go through around how you created this measurement framework. Would you like to go through some of that now?
Let's do that now.
Let's do that.
I'll be in your hands, and we'll,
Okay, that's dangerous, but
we might go
let's
back
go
to
with
the walls
that.
a little bit.
All right, bear with me one moment.
So I believe Deb and I are from very opposite ends of the spectrum. So I'm just sitting here just learning.
Oh, very friendly.
Oh, I'm loving it. I'm just like learning so much.
Okay.
Thanks, Mel. So yeah, I guess when I sort of created this thing that I've called the Communication Dividend, and dividend because it speaks the language of finance, and which I think, hopefully people start to take us a bit more seriously. It was really about helping to enable communication professionals to have communication intelligence at their fingertips, to make it accessible to everybody. So that's, I joke that I'll keep shaking the tambourine metaphorically until I drop off the perch, but that's my vision. It's a very bold vision, and let's see how I go. So Excellent. So the next thing is SMART objectives. How many of you feel confident you know how to write a SMART objective? Yeah, great.
Haven't had to do one in a while.
No,
but-
no. And I think that that's, for me, is really, the starting point for measurement. We wonder why we can't prove our value, and we don't prove our value because we don't actually write SMART objectives. We write things that we think look like SMART objectives, but they're not. They're not very smart. They're just, to encourage this or to promote that or to make, to enhance something. So I'm going to start with a SMART objective tonight, and I'm going to say that my objective for this event is to increase interest among all attendees, online and offline, in seeking your measurement aha moment. I'm going to have a baseline of 0% because I wasn't able to do a poll beforehand, and I'm going to back myself and say I want everybody to reach an aha moment by the end of this session in support of our shared vision for the PR and communication profession. That's a SMART objective. It's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's realistic, and it's time bound. So we're going to start with that as my SMART objective, and I'll show you how we'll sort of check in on my progress at the end of tonight. Okay, so next thing. How many of you have heard of the Barcelona principles? Show of hands. Anybody? Well
I
done.
think it's because you told me about them.
Okay. If you learn nothing else out of this tonight than the Barcelona principles, you have learnt and advanced your knowledge of measurement and evaluation of communication. So I didn't know about them until I got involved in AMIC. So something strange and interesting happened in Barcelona in 2005, and this is where these principles for measurement and evaluation were agreed globally for the communication and PR profession. And there are 7 principles, and I've got time. I'd like to just sort of talk to those, because this also empowers you as you go about your work and as you're working with clients and as you're formulating strategies. So the first principle is that setting measurable goals is an absolute prerequisite to communication planning, measurement, and evaluation. If you can't set a measurable objective, then you are not going to be able to, or a SMART objective, you're not going to be able to measure effectively. And that's pretty hard to do. I have been a judge in the range of awards, and I would say probably less than 50% of the award entries that I look at have SMART objectives. They've got things that they think look like a SMART objective, but they actually aren't. So the second one is about measurement and evaluation should identify outputs, outcomes, and potential impact. So I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. So outputs are the things you produce, outcomes are the change in behaviour, and the impacts are the business results. So, it, again, seems simple, but often can be challenging. So outcomes and impacts should be identified for stakeholders, society, and the organisation. So we should be looking at the impact of our work, not only on the people who engaged us, the audiences that we're engaging with, but on the broader society. And I think you would only have to probably look at what's been happening with the bomb, the Bureau of Meteorology, formerly known as the bomb, this week to understand the impact of that.
Bomb now.
Yeah,
Are they back?
Yeah,
back to bomb, or back to whatever you want to call it. That impact on society of that change of naming convention. So that might have been a little bit of a heads up if they'd been aware of the Barcelona principles. Principle 4 is qualitative and quantitative. Don't rest all of your measurement on the numbers, because, as we're saying before, qualitative information can be equally as valuable. It can really help you to understand impact on audiences. Principle 5, I said, absolutely no way should we be using ABEs. That's a whole conversation for another day. But if you are reporting to your clients from your media intelligence reports what the advertising value equivalent is, that is not best practice. And there is a bit like there never was and never will be a figure that actually it's a single number that you can use to prove your value. So don't be fooled into that. Holistic measurement involves online and offline. Again, very tempting to, you know, for all the digital bods that, you know, the world begins and ends in digital. It doesn't. We have people we work with face to face, you know, the community and stakeholder engagement folks would well understand, you know, the front facing part of your work involves people, and everything we do is delivered to a person. It's delivered to an audience. It has an impact on an audience. And then the last one is that comms management is rooted in integrity and transparency to drive learning and insights. You shouldn't fiddle with numbers. You should be aware of the methodology you're using. So they seem simple, but they are an evolution. That's the third iteration. These are the Barcelona Principles 3.0. You can Google it. You can print them out and have them at your desk, I would suggest. So again, you're happy to move on. Were there any questions about Barcelona Principles that anyone, is that sort of so obvious? It's a bit, so obvious when you look at it that you think, yeah, that just makes good sense. Okay, second tool, second framework that all of you should have in your toolkit. It's free. You can download it. You can access it at any time. It's AMEX Integrated Evaluation Framework. And I guess it works on the basis that, as the name would say, evaluation needs to be integrated. So that you have a holistic view of the strategies that you're delivering and your measurement approaches. Look, I won't go into detail on it now, so we'll jump forward, but I think suffice to say it's there, it's a tool, it guides you through a disciplined approach to strategy so that you are thinking deeply about what problem you're solving, what opportunity you're capitalising on, and getting you thinking about the best way to measure it. So, you know, how many of us have sat there with clients who go, I want a newsletter.
Oh, God.
Yep, I want a post. I want a social content strategy. Yeah, but why?
Yes.
What problem are we solving? How will we know that we're successful? And so on, you know, the feeling. And look, the last one that I'll just point to for now, we'll go forward to the measurement maturity mapper. Yep, next one. Yeah, no. I think
Have I gone too far?
gone too far. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Back. Yeah.
No, it's not on this
It's
one.
not there.
No,
It should be.
sorry. This is what we got.
Oh,
You have to share. Tell me all
it's
about
okay, I'll tell you all about it. So it's called a measurement maturity mapper, M3, easy to remember, not 3M, M3. And it's a tool that you can use both for yourself and for your clients to work out where you are in a measurement journey. And this is a journey. I don't think I have walked into any organisation that has actually got a comprehensive approach to measurement that, you know, you could confidently say tells you the whole story. It's a journey, and it really is. It's as much around cultural transformation in teams, you know, teams willing to back themselves, teams willing to have a target placed over a KPI to be actually be able to show their performance and being prepared to back themselves. A lot of the organisations, when I start out, yeah, we're going to do measurement. I don't want to measure my stuff. Does that mean me having a target on my work? Oh, someone's going to understand that, you know, maybe I can't actually be fully accountable for, you know, what that media release has done. Or no, I don't think that it's fair for me to be that. The measurement maturity mapper allows you to go through a whole series of questions and just work out where you think your organisation is, whether you're at a basic level of measurement, whether you're sort of standard, or whether you're at quite a mature level. And it really is a journey that can take years. But the most important thing is to get started. And I always say one number on its own is great. Two numbers side by side is even better, because you can compare them. Two numbers side by side with a target over the top. I'm happy.
That's great.
So that might talk to what Kate, you know, thinks is the essence of a good chart.
Yeah, so I think, let's say Deb's got the numbers. Kate, how do we tell a story with the numbers that actually makes sense visually?
All right. I got slides.
She's got slides.
She got
She's got slides. It's my slide.
And like everything that I do, it's very simplistic, not as fancy as Deb's slides, but that's okay. Okay. So generally this is the kind of chart that we see, right? Charts that are, I would call this a very default chart, and I still see this happening over and over. This is just a pure Excel chart. I see now that Power BI has basically swept the market, and charts are a little bit fancier than this, but essentially they've got the same basics here. We've got a lot of chart junk. We've got not a whole lot of information. We've just got basically numbers, and oftentimes this is what gets presented. So if we look at, we've got some data here for year-end sales by salesperson. How do we transform a basic chart like this into what we call a story chart? A story chart is a chart that actually tells a story. It's all in the name.
Funny that.
Isn't it? Okay, so we start here, right? And where do we go from here? The first thing that we need to do is make sure that we've chosen the right chart. There are basically 4 charts that we use for communication purposes. Anything more complex is for exploratory purposes, so analytics. And there's 4 charts that we want to use, and that's all. They're not in slides. I've gone old school.
Visual aids, everybody.
Yeah.
We'll come back to the slides. Before you want, you've got your standard bar chart. I'm gonna hand that to you.
Oh, like I'm on a game show.
Yeah.
We've got a standard line chart with 1 or 2 lines at a maximum.
Yeah.
Got a fairly simple pie chart. Pie charts are very divisive in the data viz world. There are a lot of times when you do and don't use a pie chart. To sum it up very briefly, a pie chart is great when you just want a vibe. So you don't want to actually know.
Vibe pie.
Yeah, it is.
Vibe pie.
When the actual numbers don't matter, but you want to get just an idea that one part is bigger than the other. You want to instill like a vibe. Nothing more tangible than a vibe. And then the final one is a column chart. There is a big difference between columns and bars. I'm not going to go into it tonight, but please don't confuse them. It gives me an eye twitch. They're very different graphs. Essentially, the reason you use a column is for anything time bound, because we see time going left to right. We see priority or lists as top to bottom. So anything that you're ranking, any sort of categorical comparison, you would generally go to a bar chart. A column, when you're talking about money, columns kind of sit in the hybrid because we see money as filling up, and what we want to do is just leverage the natural language. So if you're using money, generally a column. They're the 4 that you want to use, and that's basically it. And so often, I'll get this team of highly paid data scientists, and they're just like, are you serious? Like, I've paid how much to come to this course, and you're giving me freaking bar charts? Like they can do anything in Power BI or Tableau. But this is literally all you need for communication, because these are the charts that everyone understands. And the biggest mistake we can make is to assume that especially executives who we assume are highly trained, highly educated in things like, data visualization, understand complex graphs. They actually don't. This is the graphs that you need. Okay. So in light of that, let's come back to our chart.
I'm on it.
All right. So we've got this chart, and the first thing we do is make sure that we're actually using the right chart. Are we using what we call an explain chart? In this case, we are. Generally, what I suggest to people is to have a bit of a play. Data communication is 50% art, 50% science. So let's have a look. If we try and use a different chart, we can rank. Generally, when I'm ranking people, or in this case, it's people. If I'm ranking some sort of category, I will use a bar chart. But like I said, we're talking about money. This just doesn't feel right. Money doesn't fill up sideways. Money fills up bottom to top. So let's come back. I'm quite happy that we've got the right chart. So the first thing is making sure that we've got the right chart. This will all come together, I promise. The second thing we need to do is declutter. So we're just going to Marie Kondo it, and we're going to take away everything that we don't actually need. Chart junk is stuff that just takes cognitive processing, which are things like our grid lines, color. We need to basically strip out all color. We need to order them in the right way, because the first thing that a lot of you are probably doing is playing ping pong with your eyes, looking at who's the top, who's the bottom. Your eyes are constantly darting back and forward, trying to rank them in your head. So the first thing, they need to be ranked. So go to the next one. They need to be ranked top to bottom, bottom to top, whatever makes the most sense. And then we're going to get rid of more chart junk. We're going to get rid of grid lines. We're going to make our bars a bit fatter, just a bit more aesthetically pleasing. We're going to make our title all left aligned. There's no specific reason for left aligning a title other than it just looks more professional and it looks a lot neater. All right, so that's the final thing we're doing to declutter is taking away all color. Completely move everything into the background. So then we're on to number 3, which is we want to then draw attention. Now, there's a lot of stories that this data can tell us. This is just straight data, right? But there's so many different stories that people can take from this. Go one more. We could be looking at the top salespeople. We could be looking at the bottom salespeople. Depending on where we want to draw attention to at one time, this is where we start to bring in color. Let's say, for example, though, that we just want to look at the top 3 salespeople. This is where we bring our color in, and you can't help but look just at the top 3. And now the rest are used purely for context, but you can't help but be drawn to one very specific part of that chart. And then the final thing is we want to give, number 4 is a insight title. Too often our charts are just named with year-end total sales, which is what the data is. It is not what the data is telling us. So in this case, it might be bonus eligibility by salesperson. So this tells a very clear story now. This exact data can be used to tell a very different story. Exact same data, very different story. Depending where you draw attention to, depending what title you give your chart. And what the data is has to be there. So I make it always the subtitle. So if then we compare the 2 charts side by side, we can see the difference between a default chart and one that's had pretty minimal changes really, but very intentional changes, drawing attention where we want. And now it's a very professional story-driven chart. Go one more and it's going to give you the process. If you're going to take a photo of any of the slides, this is probably the one to do it because it gives the 4 steps on how to actually turn a chart from a very default into a story chart, which is make sure that the chart is an explain chart, the right chart, that it's decluttered and just everything that's not needed is taken away. Attention is drawn to where you want people to look, and the title is an insight title. Love it.
Fantastic.
Has everybody gotten something out of those last 2? I feel
I want
like
to go home to a chart, right?
I have a question.
If you're trying to, you had to say have that graph in a report or presentation, and you have to say discuss people who maybe who with their resume or people who maybe we do separate charts. It's just,
Yes.
you're trying to, and so you're even on like a report, then you can say that same chart. You can't, or so
One story, one chart.
So I'll just repeat the question for those online. So the question was, if you are showing 2 stories, so you've got the people who need to look at their resume and top performers, would you have those as 2 separate charts? Kate saying one story, one chart. Is that right?
Yeah, I would definitely have 2 separate charts in that case. And this is the exact mess that we get into. We try and save. I don't know what it is. Like, do we try and save paper? Do we try and compress? But we're not giving any less information. We're just piling it on top of each other. Because this whole thing about too many slides happened, and you're not allowed to use more than 10 slides, so that everybody who had 20 slides, all that 20 just went into 10 slides. it just started stacking on top of each other. So generally one story, one chart.
Love it. Next question.
So you talked about taking out the grid line.
Yep.
So what happens if your audience is very, it's all about credibility and those fine details, then a grid line is acceptable so you can really specify that difference, or you think not at all?
So the question for those online is, with grid lines, can you leave them in depending on the audience, essentially, if they're very detail oriented people? Would that be a good synopsis? Okay.
Depends what you're trying to achieve. Some people need the grid lines if you really want to see where something is in terms of a target, grid lines are quite good. However, if you've got some detail that you want to show, just a data label would be much more effective. Either inside or on top. Do you know what I mean by inside the bar or on top? I would generally go for a data label over a grid line, because your data label will give you a much more exact answer for your detail people. A grid line gives you an approximate, in which case, if you're just looking for an approximate, do you need people to, have their rulers out, trying to work out exactly where it is? You either want approximate or you want exact. There's no real in between. Yeah, so hopefully that answers that question.
If there's any questions for online, please pop them in the chat. While we're waiting for a couple more questions, I actually have one for you, Deb. So you've taken us through the measurement frameworks. Can you give us an example of where you've seen those frameworks put into practice and changes happened, or something has happened out of actually, they've gone through the work of doing the measurement and it's made a difference? And I'm putting you on the spot there, but
no, that's fine. I probably would refer to a case of UNICEF where, again, it's a case study. You can Google, it's an AMEC case study where they realigned their communication strategy to take a global and local approach to their communication. And they needed to have an integrated evaluation framework for that, because you can imagine how big UNICEF is. You can imagine all of the localized issues. So by going through that process of being very clear about their objectives, and their objectives sat around, voice, engagement and advocacy. So they had a higher order objectives, which were SMART objectives. I just don't know them off the top of my head, but they sat around those three themes. They were then able to segment their audiences globally. They're able to tailor their activity locally, but through that integrated framework, they had a common language across geography, across their outreach, and all of that then laddered up to the global strategy. So I think the power of an integrated framework is that where you have diverse and dispersed audiences within your organisation, it gives you that common vocabulary across them. And as a result of it, UNICEF's won all sorts of awards from the absolute clarity that's come from deciding what they were going to be known for, deciding what they were going to measure, and understanding why, and having that very clear across all of their units, subunits, country outreach, and so on. I think that might be a little bit a little bit general, but if you go online and look up UNICEF global communication strategy, you'll see the power of that. And I guess you would understand the theory is that if everyone is working to a similar framework, if you are all agreed on what your objectives are, if you can understand who your audiences are, if you know what you're measuring and why, then you can aggregate that in a meaningful way. And I guess one of the lessons from there was that you can't just come up with a framework. You've got to actually go through the change process with those staff who are responsible for gathering data, for implementing strategy, so that they actually understand the why, not only the what they're doing. So a lot was invested in actually equipping, multinational, multilingual audiences to understand why this was important. And it all comes back to advocacy for UNICEF and funding. And they've just gone gangbusters ever since they've implemented that approach.
Yeah, great. Definitely one to Google later on.
Yeah.
Kate, can you think of a similar situation where you've had a client or maybe someone in one of your workshops who has had that aha moment when you've been able to take that data and just make it simple, like you say?
Yeah, we were working with an insurance company last year, and this one particular guy, he had just been banging his head against a wall for the last couple of months because they were talking about, where they'd invested money, I guess. And he had this chart, and it basically looked something like this. It was a little bit more complex, and the top piece of their portfolio was global equities, and that wasn't a concern for them. What was a concern was their number 2, which was real estate at the time. This is about 18 months ago. And they were really concerned about number 2. But every time he brought this chart up to talk to the executive team, all they wanted to talk about was global equities because it was the largest part. And he couldn't get them to talk about what he wanted to really discuss. So he made all of these grey as, story chart, and highlighted this one in red and just said, this is a concern for us. And straight away, the only thing that they could look at was this one red bar, and he could finally direct the conversation and draw attention to exactly and have the conversations that he needed to have. And yeah, he was very happy that they could actually start to change their portfolio then. He's like, we don't need to touch global equities. Stop talking about it. So that was a bit of a success story for us using the story chart process.
And something so simple, isn't it? It's so
It
simple.
really is.
Yeah.
It really is. But, we're visual creatures, and we're at the heart of it. We're pretty simple creatures. We like color. We like, we go to where our eyes are drawn. It's why we watch TV, because it's colorful and moving, and it's a basic human innate response. Yeah.
Sorry, Mel, as
Please.
Kate was talking, I did actually recall an example I should have used, which was one of my own clients. Probably just a little bit too.
Well, that's all I got.
Yeah. A little too quick to look overseas. But one of our clients actually won a bronze award in the Global Communication Awards, a global financial company headquartered in Brisbane. And through the work that we did with introducing an integrated evaluation framework, which was again a cultural transformation, it took a new approach for reporting. The C-suite, sort of the senior executive team were wanting more hard numbers from, as you can imagine, in a global financial company, and it was so successful that they ended up getting a 30% increase in their budget.
Wow.
At the year end, which is an amazing
Yeah.
impact and a result from the credibility that they gained through more effective articulation of their value. So yeah, that was
That's
a
incredible.
success story.
30%.
Mm.
Not bad.
Yeah,
Yes, we all want a 30% pay rise as well.
that's
one
right.
way
So
to go.
start measuring is the answer.
Any other questions from the room before we close up for tonight, or online? No? Well, look, personally, just want to say a massive thank you to both of you for your time tonight, and joining IABC, one of our last events for the year, but certainly a topic that we absolutely will need to know more about and start using more and more. Could you please put your hands together for Deb and Kate? Thank you so much. I'll just quickly come back to this because we do have a couple of helpful links that the ladies have shared. So the Communications Dividend, which is Deb's Corner of the World, and Presentation Boss is Kate's Corner of the World. The AMAC framework that Deb was talking about, and the Smart Objective Builders, that's an online tool that anyone can use.
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. So just log on to that and have a play, I would imagine, is a good way to do it.
Absolutely.
And I know both these ladies are always up for a chat, so please connect with them on LinkedIn. Not hard to find.
No.
None of us are generally. Probably should be sharing this with the people online. Sorry, online team, failing at this. So these are the, but I will put these in the post-event email, which you will all get as well. There's Kate and Deb's details. So again, take a quick photo, or I'll pop those in the post-event email. It is IABC member month. Would be remiss of me not to mention it while we're all here. So up until the 31st of October, so coming up very quickly, you get 20% off your international dues when you join. So it's actually the best time to join is pretty much in the next few days if you'd like to take advantage of that. Personally, I love IABC because of that international focus. I was in Malaysia recently doing some workshops for a client there, and I met up with the chapter president of the Malaysian chapter while I was there, and we went out for dinner and traded war stories, which was great. Be pleased to know, or maybe not, that things are pretty much the same everywhere you go in the world in terms of corporate frustration. And then later this year, I'm going to catch up with the London chapter lead and the Toronto chapter lead when I'm in Canada. So it's that worldwide network that you just don't get anywhere else, which is really, really cool. And of course, all the learning stuff. Speaking of learning stuff, save a date, because Thursday, the 10th of November, we're having breakfast on Robert Walters' budget, which is nice, in their lovely offices at Eagle Street. And if you don't know Amanda Newbury from Articulate, she is a gun in the world of stakeholder engagement and communication. And we are going to be very hands-on masterclass that she'll be running on how to get people to act now for climate change. So when talking to stakeholders in your business, but also your business stakeholders, how do you get people to do that? So she is very excited about this. She's got arts and craft planned, I think. So it's going to be great. And we get breakfast, which is even better. So you get to eat and learn at the same time.
I can't believe I didn't bring craft.
Right? You didn't bring craft, but you did bring
Yeah,
charts.
you
You brought charts. I mean, come on. Like, that's the first time I think I've ever had anybody hold up charts here, which is very exciting. On your tables and on the screen is just a QR code. Would love if you could just take a couple of minutes to give us your feedback before you leave tonight. Literally will take you 5 minutes, if that. It's like 3 or 4 questions. Your feedback helps us get better. Don't worry, I won't cry. It's going to be fine. But I would really love to get your thoughts on any future events as well. We are starting to plan for next year. We are planning to do a couple of joint events with PRIA as well, and the Brisbane Corporate Affairs Network, one of which is our Christmas party on the 25th of November. So we decided this year, why are we having 3 separate parties? Why don't we just do one big communications party? Yeah. That one's not working. Is the one on the table okay? Try that. Sorry, at home crew. I'll put the link in the chat for you. And we've also joined forces with them to develop a joint event calendar, which you'll also see on the table there and in the email that come out later. So essentially subscribe to the calendar. All our event dates go into your calendar, and we'll just update them as things change. So you'll never miss a thing. And it also means that we won't be scheduling events on the same night or the same week or any of that as well. So that's a lot from me. I'll shut up. Thank you so much for coming along,
Thanks,
ladies.
Mel.
I really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for joining us online and in person tonight. Thank you. Thanks very much, everybody. See you online, crew.
Yep.
Thank you. Bye.
Beautiful. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mel.
Seamless.
Thanks,
Seamless.
guys.
You did really
Brilliant.
well.
Loved it. See you at the Christmas party.
Thanks, Kathy.